Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the inaugural presentation of the Leonard I. Beerman Award for Social Justice in Action. Please find your seats. The program will be beginning.
Religion and politics. I've said this before, and I want to say it again. A religion must be political. A religion divorced from politics is a religion divorced from life and from people. And I'm not talking about partisan politics in the churches and synagogues and mosques. No, religion must be political because this world is political. For this world has to do with the decisions we make, the decisions that determine who shall live and who shall die, and how we live and how we die. A religion that does not help us, cajole us, nudge us to confront the moral issues present in all of this is merely another antidepressant, another anti-anxiety medication. It is at best a subordinate amusement. It does not denounce, it adapts. It does not move the heart, it hardens the heart. It does not stir the conscience, it blunts the conscience. And those who want a religion which blunts the conscience would rob Judaism of what I believe is its moral grandeur.
Good evening, and welcome to Leo Baeck Temple. Welcome home to Leo Baeck Temple, to all of you. Back in 1949, a newly ordained 28-year-old man headed west to become this congregation's founding rabbi. And for the 65 years that followed, he inspired us, he challenged us, he provoked us, and most of all, he led us to believe in our capacity and our responsibility to build a world where peace would be more than a facile dream, where justice would be more than a distant scriptural longing, where love would be more than an idle and empty platitude. And we who carry forward the sacred mission of this temple, as well as the countless others in this city and beyond, to whom he was both rabbi and prophet, continue to feel his spirit and his example rumbling inside us, holding us accountable. Tonight, the Leonard I. Beerman Foundation for Peace and Justice has brought us together as its first ever award is presented to a true giant of courage and principle, Representative John Lewis. And so, on this evening made holy through the power of legacy, to urge us and change us so that we might change the world, let us begin with resolute words of prayer. Holy One of blessing, whose presence fills creation, open our souls to the living stories that we will study on this night, that they might prod us to ask more of ourselves. Stir our spirits to unrest over our society's moral failure. Kindle in us a renewed hunger to love, even while bombarded with hatred. For oceans of ink have been spilled to say it. We must love one another as we love ourselves. The hammer of chaos beats loudly in our time. Let us Sanctify our lives by being among those who kindle light in every dark valley of humankind. For this is how we will preserve our Rabbi's story and give new life to his vision for the human family. Let us together say.
Good evening. I'm proud to welcome you to the inaugural event of the Leonard I. Beerman Foundation, an organization established to perpetuate the spirit of the founding rabbi of Leo Baeck Temple. My name is Mike Farrell. It's my privilege to introduce this evening. It was very touching for me to see him and hear him yet again. But if Leonard were here tonight, he would ask, "What are you doing here? Why are you not at home or at the ballpark watching the Dodgers?" Leonard's family is with us, Ms. Eve Beerman, Judith Beerman O'Hanlon and her husband Neil, their son Matt O'Hanlon, and his fiancée Lauren Paul. Thank you for being here. I'm going to skip the usual formalities of introducing guests and celebrities because Leonard and the family are our celebrities tonight. Leonard Beerman was a brilliant, courageous, inspiring figure to many. So many of his thoughts continue to move me. Given the dark times in which we live, these words of his in particular strike me as being appropriate. The most deeply human and courageous men and women are those who in life and death dare to submit themselves to the ordeal of walking through the fire of selfhood, of loneliness and tragedy. In their example, we can learn that this life, this world, for all its cynicism and stupidity and anguish, is also a place where change is possible, where one can take on a host of evils, even death itself. There's no guarantee of victory, but there is a choice. One either collaborates with the enemy, with whatever is miserable or inhumane, or one joins the resistance. To be most deeply human is to be among the resistors, to resist whatever demeans life. And that will lead us to become aware of what one human being owes to another, can mean to another, and to have compassion for all people, all of us, in our terrible fragility. Leonard's words always take me to a place of hope. The foundation bearing his name, then, supports those resistors who walk in the path of Leonard Beerman, demonstrating the compassion and ferocity of his commitment to social justice. We are therefore deeply proud that our initial public act is presenting the first Leonard I. Beerman Award for Social Justice in Action to Congressman, Representative John Lewis, who has blazed his own extraordinary path in the history of civil rights in this country. And though they never met, Representative Lewis and Rabbi Beerman were cut from the same cloth. Both devoted their lives to the principles of peace and justice and equality for all. You will soon meet him in the company of another hero of mine, another resistor, and a dear friend of Leonard's, Pastor Jim Lawson. Pastor Jim Lawson's relationship with Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King, is well known, but I was moved by Dr. Clarence Jones's comment earlier that he sat with Dr. King talking about the possibilities for their movement for the future. And Dr. Jones said, Dr. King said, "We have rabbis with us." He said, we have Rabbi Leonard Beerman in Los Angeles. So, should anyone wonder, at times of perplexity, such as the moment in which we currently find ourselves, what Leonard might say or do, he would act in concert with our heroes tonight, without hesitation, to challenge those who collaborate with misery and inhumanity. He would join those who resist the demeaning of life. He would act. He would stand against injustice. He would find a way to reignite and inspire the fundamental goodness in the human condition. That was his way. And that is what we honor tonight as we begin an annual tradition of acknowledging those who walk in the path of our beloved friend and mentor, Leonard Beerman.
I first came here in 1958, walked through those doors, and Dr. King spoke up and said, "Are you the boy from Troy? Are you John Lewis?" And I said, "Dr. King, I'm John Robert Lewis." I gave my whole name. I wanted him to know that I was the right person.
John Robert Lewis, the son of sharecroppers, was born and raised near the small town of Troy, Alabama, deep in the segregated South.
I knew all around me that something was wrong. I would question my mother, my father, and I would say, why segregation? Why racial discrimination? And my mother would say, that's the way it is, that's the way it is. My father would say, that's the way it is. Don't get in trouble, don't get in the way.
Inspired by the actions of Rosa Parks and the words of Martin Luther King, John Lewis embarked on a journey of nonviolence that would help change the course of history.
The philosophy and discipline of nonviolence became for me a way of life.
For him, nonviolence wasn't a tactic, a strategy, just a means to an end. It is and was who John Lewis is as a human being.
He led sit-ins at segregated lunch counters and participated in the Freedom Rides.
He is one of the most courageous people I've ever known, I've ever met. Almost every phase of his civil rights career, he was not afraid to put his body on the line and to suffer, if need be, for the cause. Just an incredibly brave person.
He was ridiculed, humiliated, beaten, and arrested more than 40 times.
You come to that point when you're participating in a nonviolent protest where you lose all sense of fear. You have to go on, you have to be prepared to die if necessary.
He would never turn his back and run from any crisis. And he was prepared to take the consequences. And because of that, I think a lot of other people have not had to get hurt.
At the historic March on Washington, John Lewis, just 23 years old, was a keynote speaker.
In the body of the speech, I said something like, "One man, one vote is the African cry. It is ours too. It must be ours."
Then, on March 7, 1965, John Lewis helped lead a group of 600 orderly protesters across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. The day would become known as Bloody Sunday.
We lined up in twos to walk in an orderly, peaceful, nonviolent fashion from Selma to Montgomery, to dramatize to the nation and to the world that people wanted to register to vote. We got to the edge of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, crossing the Alabama River. Down below we saw a sea of blue, the Alabama State Troopers. And the major said, "Troopers, advance." They came toward us, beating us with nightsticks and bullwhips. I was hit in the head by a state trooper with a nightstick. I thought I saw death. I thought I was going to die.
It wasn't until I watched the news on Bloody Sunday that finally I understood the true sacrifices so many were making. That day, I joined an entire generation of people who made a larger commitment to the pursuit of justice than they had ever made before.
A week later, President Lyndon Johnson addressed the U.S. Congress.
And President Johnson started that speech off that night by saying, "I speak tonight
for the
dignity of man and for the destiny of democracy." In that speech, President Johnson condemned the violence in Selma. He introduced the Voting Rights Act, and before he concluded that speech, he said, "And we shall overcome." That was the first time hearing an American president using the theme song of the Civil Rights Movement. I looked at Dr. King, and he started crying. Tears came down his face, and I think we all cried. We made it from Selma to Montgomery. The Congress passed the act, and on August 6, 1965, Lyndon Johnson signed a law that led to a transformation, not just of Southern politics, but American politics.
You know, heroes are few and far between. You see people and you say, well, this person created a heroic act, but then you think about it really wasn't. John Lewis is an American hero.
Since 1965, going back every year, it's like being reconnected. The bridge for me is a very sacred place because that bridge helped liberate all of us. And each time I go back, it makes me stronger and provide a great sense of hope, and a greater sense of optimism about the future.
be in such company is ennobling. Before we began the program, Judith said to me, "It's so sad that he's not here, but his spirit is here everywhere." And it clearly is, and it is exalting to feel him and to feel so many that he admired and loved, one of whom I want to introduce. But before I do, I want to say, Judith, how much it meant that you did so much work to put this event together. Everyone appreciates it very, very much. Dr. Martin Luther King was a man we all know and revere. Dr. Martin Luther King's commitment to nonviolence is something that is a stuff of legend. The fact that he had a coach, a teacher, a mentor who taught him about nonviolence is not as well known, and it should be. Reverend Jim Lawson, a civil rights hero, came came back from India where he was studying when he learned of the struggle and became affiliated with the movement for civil rights and became the apostle of nonviolence, to whom Dr. King felt such great gratitude. Please welcome Pastor Jim Lawson.
Like Mike and many of you, I am deeply moved to be here on this marvelous occasion. Surely your presence, the presence of so many of you with whom we have walked and marched, and in fact been to jail together and stood together on so many issues, helps to make this one of those rare historic moments that surely I shall always remember. To be in this sacred space where Leonard stood as poet and prophet and pastor, as passionate advocate for life itself, human life to be displayed before the splendor of God's eternity is always and is tonight extraordinary. After Mike's remarks and presentation from Rabbi Beerman and this wonderful piece of film on Congressman John Lewis, I almost sense as though that's more than enough to at least say to John, I present this award on behalf of the Leonard Beerman Foundation. But I do want to just add one or two words that I have sought to put together for this wonderful moment. One of Rabbi Beerman's remarkable teacher, Abraham Joshua Heschel, in his classic document on the philosophy of Judaism, the first volume, God's Search for Man, I was struck, and I recently reread the volume back the latter part of last year, and struck again, and it's been haunting me, wherein that reflection, poetry, meditation on the philosophy of the people of God who are called the Jews of this temple and elsewhere, Heschel tells us that there are in the world a few men, and he used the term men, who are making decisions that affect us all, over which we ordinary people have little or any control, but who are in destructive ways affecting the future of humankind. This book was written back in the late 60s, but published in the early 70s. Now we gather here acknowledging that that's part of the plight that we all dwell in and abide in. But in this place, we acknowledge the other side of the story. That this night, two men have indeed made decisions that help us to see the way through the confusion and chaos and change and chance, so that not only is life preserved, but the unity of life and the unity of the human family can indeed be explored and seen and acted upon. Leonard Beerman and Congressman John Lewis. And in these gloomy days in our own country, they both lift the light for us, if we would, to be guided by, to work by, to live for. When I met John Lewis, he was either 18 or 19 years of age. He was already, as I got to know him week after week in Nashville, Tennessee, he was already what some traditional people have called an old soul. And you see that in the film. A young man of great maturity, and a maturity that probably had been cultivated by the fact that the film suggests. He saw the environment in which he lived in Troy, Alabama, could not be the will of God or the will of the human or the will of life or the will of justice and truth. And there are many stories about this, but I would simply want to lift up that John Lewis became a part of 4 or 5 months of weekly, once a week examination of how you make personal and social and political change through nonviolent struggle, as exemplified in the prophets, as exemplified in Jesus of Nazareth, as exemplified in multitudes of ordinary people whose whole agenda of life is the agenda of affirming life and living life to the full. So John, perhaps not as well known at all, is one of the shapers of what he himself has called the American nonviolent movement, the nonviolent movement of America, which as a student I list from approximately 1953 to 1973. He was in on the ground floor because he felt in those workshops in which I try to help them and help us all interpret, on the one side, the terrible pain that many of us have suffered, but that too many people in the world suffer, and how that pain could be challenged and confronted, transformed, and the earth, Nashville, Tennessee, could begin its road towards change. John was one of those people. He was not even skeptical, as I remember in those workshops and in those days. He was, however, had that significant epiphany when, on February 27th, 1960, he was among the first group of people arrested in that campaign that's called often the National Civil Campaign. That was only the second major campaign of nonviolent struggle. And I want to simply add to that John, as a young man, having understood full well that deep in his own soul, this form of struggle, rooted so much in the finest of the human spirit, represents both the motive and the power and the energy by which he could put his own life on the line in the struggle. He was a part of the second major nonviolent struggle or campaign in that period. And from then on, beginning in Nashville, he was one of our finest, most creative spirits, not alone in his courage, but in his creative effort to see what he was learning in both deed and action, now his own life would frame. There were nearly 15 years of direct action campaigns of a major character from that moment on. In his life in Alabama, Mississippi, and Freedom Ride, especially the voting rights campaign, effectively helped to shape the entire struggle. In presenting this award, I want you to understand that while both John and I view Martin King as our companion, symbol of the struggle and of the possibilities, that John was one of the folk who emerged that helped that movement to reach such power that 3 presidents responded to the need to make changes. 3 presidents decided that it was something that had to be changed, that the work of what the historian Vincent Harding calls the Black Freedom Movement was not only, in the words of John Kennedy, as old as the scriptures and as relevant as the Constitution. John has been always a wonderful and remarkable human being. He's one of the models for what we know we as a people can yet produce as leadership in this nation, the leadership that will stand for equality, liberty, and justice of all, for an integrity in public life and private life that helps our nation to achieve its highest levels of making a society accessible to every boy and every girl everywhere across our 50 states. And I think, for me, it's a distinguished privilege to be able to present Congressman John Lewis this first Justice, Social Justice in Action Award. He richly deserves not only this award, but our thanksgiving. Such a person walks among us, lives and works with us. His highest achievement may be, well, 2 things. One, the African American Museum, which opened a year ago.
Yes.
He publicly presented that bill for 15 or 16 years, year after year, until finally in the Obama administration years, it began, it's now complete. It is a symbol of how we human beings have to mark our history so that future generations know indeed the whole truth about who we are and who we were then. His second major achievement, from my point of view, is that he is in many ways the moral voice for politics, for justice, for our Congress. Think of this, that is one of the 500 most significant and powerful political figures in our country. He started a process years ago of bringing Congress people and others to Selma, Alabama, to help them understand not only that struggle, to recognize that yes, one man, one vote, one person, one vote, that must become the model for engaging the public. But for even more than just those two things, this award is given because he emulates the spirit, the character, the bravery, the nobility of our great friend, Leonard Beerman. So, John, Congressman Lewis, will you come forward, please?
Good evening. You look beautiful. Handsome, just wonderful. This is almost too much. To be standing here at this time in this unbelievable place, in this pulpit, where a modern prophet stood and spoke of justice, freedom, and love. Named for this unbelievable rabbi who taught the way of peace, the way of justice. And to be presented this honor by Jim Lawson, my teacher, my friend, and my brother. I never had the opportunity to meet the leader of the synagogue in this temple, Rabbi Leonard Beerman. But I feel tonight his spirit is here in this place. You know, Jim, I had an opportunity to meet Rabbi Husher and walk with him across that bridge on the third attempt to walk from Selma to Montgomery. So to be here tonight, I just want to say thank you. I feel more than honored and grateful. But as you saw on the video, I grew up in rural Alabama, 50 miles from Montgomery, outside of a little place called Troy. My father was a sharecropper, a tenant farmer. But in 1944, when I was 4 years old, and I do remember when I was 4, my father had saved $300, and a man sold him 110 acres of land. We still own this land today. On this farm, we raised a lot of cotton and corn, lots of peanuts. Don't tell the people in Georgia, I don't eat too many peanuts today. I ate so many peanuts when I was growing up. I just don't want to see no more peanuts. But on the farm, it was my responsibility to care for the chickens.
Oh boy.
And I fell in love with raising chickens. As a little boy, like many ministers, rabbis, and others, I wanted to preach what we call the gospel. So in raising these chickens from time to time, Jim Lawson, I would gather all of my chickens together in the chicken yard, like you're gathered here tonight. And I would start preaching to these chickens. And when I look back on it, some of these chickens would bow their heads. Some of these chickens would shake their heads. They never quite said amen. But I'm convinced that some of those chickens that I preached to in the 40s and the 50s tended to listen to me much better than some of my colleagues listen to me today in the Congress. As a matter of fact, some of those chickens were just a little more productive. At least they produce eggs. Well, that's enough of that. When we would visit the little town of Troy, visit Montgomery, visit Tuskegee, I saw the signs that said white men, colored men, white women, white waiting, colored waiting. I would come home and ask my mother, my father, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, why? That's the way it is. Don't get in the way, don't get in trouble. But in 1955, 15 years old in the 10th grade, I heard of Rosa Parks, I heard of Martin Luther King Jr., heard Dr. King speaking on our radio. And in 1957, I met Rosa Parks. 58, Jim Lawson, I met you. I met Martin Luther King Jr. It changed my life. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being you. And I want to thank all of you here tonight for finding ways to get in the way.
Yes, yes.
For finding ways to get in trouble. What I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Sometimes I feel that in America during this unbelievable period, we're too quiet.
Me too.
We need to speak up. I always said to some of my friends and colleagues in the Congress, to the young people all around America and in my district, that when you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have a moral obligation to do something, to say something. You cannot afford to be quiet. There are forces in Washington today trying to take us back to another time, to another place. But we must be more determined than ever before. And we've come too far, we made too much progress, and we're not going back, we're going forward.
All right.
I tell young children in the 4th, 5th, and 6th, and 7th grade that we have a right to know what is in the food we eat. We have a right to know what is in the water we drink.
Yes.
We have a right to know what is in the air we breathe. That we must do our part in saving this little piece of real estate we call Earth for generations yet unborn.
Yes.
So, receiving this honor tonight, I will go back to Washington, D.C. more than ever before, more determined to speak out, and get in good and necessary trouble. So thank you very much.
If you haven't heard enough yet, if you haven't seen enough yet, we have an opportunity that not too many people have had. we have the opportunity to hear from two of the great civil rights, human rights heroes in our nation. And the conversation will be moderated this evening by a man that Leonard adored. Leonard talked about David Myers more and more colorfully than most. He thinks the man is brilliant, he's correct. He thinks the man is dedicated and thoughtful and compassionate, and he's more than correct. David Myers is a professor of history at UCLA, and he is a friend of Leonard's, and please welcome him.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you to Reverend Lawson and Representative Lewis for gracing us with your presence. It is such a great honor and privilege. I do have one important piece of news to convey to the audience. Oh, okay, Susan. Maybe I'll hold off on that piece of news. It looked good for a minute there, Susan. Well, it's really a great honor to be here as a member of the board of the Leonard I. Beerman Foundation and as a deep admirer of both John Lewis and Jim Lawson. Tonight is the first of what we hope will be many occasions to celebrate and support the struggle for justice in the spirit of Leonard Beerman of blessed memory. I must express my appreciation for a dear friend without whom we would not be here tonight. The person who really conceived of the evening, both in its grand design and its minute details, and who has been the driving force behind the Foundation's work, Dr. Joan Beerman. In a moment, we'll have a conversation with Representative Lewis and Reverend Lawson about the past and future, but I would like to make two brief personal observations, which I believe will be relevant to the evening. And this is in the tradition of everything has been said already tonight, but not everybody has said it. Sort of a sacred truth of the academic. First, my own sense of Jewishness in the most profound sense owes to the example of my father, who, as a young lawyer in Scranton, Pennsylvania, decided, over the objections of all around him, including his parents, to pick up from his fledgling practice and go down to St. Augustine, Florida in the summer of 1964, after the murders of Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner. There, he worked to defend African-American women and men who were struggling for equality. He was only welcome on the black side of town. To be elsewhere would have endangered his life. But there he met some of your colleagues, gentlemen, from the movement, Andy Young, C.T. Vivian, Hosea Williams, and Dr. King. He followed up his work the next summer in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, where he argued successfully before a racist federal judge by the name of Harold Cox to desegregate Hattiesburg City Hall and Library. Now, this was a very minor victory in the larger struggle, but it revealed a couple of very important points. First, my father's moral imperative to act was rooted in a biblical ethos that has nurtured Judaism and its fellow monotheistic creeds ever since. Tzedek, tzedek, yerdov. Justice, justice, thou shalt pursue. We read in Deuteronomy 16:20. And second, that commitment to this pursuit of justice was the common legacy of Jews and African Americans. We who share memory, ancient and modern, of the pain of slavery, but also hope in the prospect of liberation in a long sought after promised land. I just have to say we're here with us Clarence Jones, who was so instrumental to the movement and has been such an important presence in forging the alliance between Jews and African Americans, about which a movie is forthcoming, which I hope we will all have an opportunity to see together. My father has been my great teacher in these lessons, and so too 40 years later was my beloved mentor and friend, our beloved mentor and friend, Rabbi Leonard Beerman. Leonard bore within him an unerring sense of justice from his earliest years, and his sense of justice, as with my father, was rooted in his Jewishness. As he preached in his very first public setting, his chapel sermon at the Hebrew Union College on October 30th, 1948, the Jewish people, he said, is the eternal dissident, the great disobedient child of history. Jews were called upon, Leonard believed, to use that status to afflict the comfortable while comforting the afflicted. To do so is not to assert moral superiority, but rather to embrace the prophetic mission of pursuing justice. Leonard Beerman embraced that prophetic mission with wisdom, with courage, with passion, and with fierceness. He was fierce in his opposition to all forms of injustice, and he was fierce in his love of human beings. We recall that fierceness tonight. We yearn for it. We demand it in these perplexing times. And we know that Leonard would demand it of us. Nothing less than fierceness in our pursuit of justice, and nothing less than fierceness in our love of fellow human beings. It's lonely without Leonard. But what a gift to have two extraordinary comrades in arms, brothers in the struggle for justice, John Lewis and his own teacher in the path of nonviolence, Jim Lawson. Thank you so much for being with us. And now we're going to have a conversation. So, I'd like to, if I can, since I'm an historian, take us back to, I think it was 1958, and that workshop or seminar that Reverend Lawson, you were conducting in the lessons of nonviolence. I'm wondering if you can maybe set the scene for us. You came back from India in 1955, I believe it was. 56. And you undertook to educate a generation of young people in the lessons of nonviolence. I wonder if you could tell us what you actually sought to accomplish, what it was like in that moment, and then Representative Lewis, what was that experience like for you in that intense setting in Nashville in 19... Okay.
As I indicated, well, growing up in rural Alabama, living in Nashville, the first city that I lived in, I grew up somewhat shy. I guess that's why I fell in love with the chicken, because they couldn't talk back to me. And I didn't like segregation. I didn't like racial discrimination, but I didn't know what I could do. I've been deeply moved by what I heard in Dr. King's sermon on the radio and by the action of Rosa Parks. But I was attending a church service in downtown Nashville, First Baptist Church. Kelly Miller Smith was preaching, and he mentioned the workshop. That's how I first heard about the workshop, Jim. And I made it. He didn't really recruit me. No, I heard the message. I heard the message. It was an announcement saying it would be nonviolent. This was the Social Action Committee.
Okay.
At the church.
All right, good.
And so I made a decision. You know, I have a very good memory, Jim.
Yeah, well, you do.
So I made a decision to attend this workshop.
See, and I think the important thing about this is that it was Kelly Miller Smith who was chairperson of our SCLC affiliate in Nashville, the first one organized in '57, and we had decided in the fall of '58 that we were going to decide to have the second wave of nonviolent direct action in Nashville. And so we planned it the entire year of '59 in the workshops where we recruited people. I thought Kelly had recruited you, and that you had recruited Jim Bevel and Paul Brooks and Julius Scruggs and
Bernard Lafayette.
And Bernard Lafayette, yes. I had recruited Curtis Murphy and Paul LaPrade, who recruited Diane Ash. We actually set out to recruit people to get them to participate in it. So we had a group of maybe 20 to 30 people in the initial workshops that began in September of 1959.
And Representative Lewis, did you take to the message initially from the very first moment? Did it take time? What was the impact of this on
From the very beginning, I adopted, I accepted the teaching.
That's what I just said. He was a solid human being who I could tell from the very first workshop that this was speaking to his inner self in a way that he had never known before, and that it was taking.
And being in, very young, being in that setting, listen to Jim Lawson, telling the good news, how we can act and how we can accept the way of peace, the way of love, as a way of life, as a way of living, and teaching us to love and not to hate, not to become bitter, but to be persistent and insistent.
That's right.
And to never, ever give up. It registered with me, and I have not looked back since.
And you may be interested in knowing, John Lewis may not remember this, but one of the tools I used as I moved across the Southeast talking about nonviolent struggle, one of my first determinations was to convince people that the Hebrew Christian Bibles had stories that could be titled nonviolence. And the book of Exodus and the story of Moses and the people moving out of the Egypts into the promising lands was a major story. I, in fact, try to suggest that it was perhaps one of the first pieces of recorded history that showed how a people emancipated and healed and saved themselves, and that it ought to be a model for all of us.
All right.
So now that comes out of my own Black Christian experience, because in my earliest memories of the church are at age 4, and I learned to sing "Go Down Moses."
Oh, yes, yeah.
God's going to trouble the waters. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn. These are all spirituals that came out of prior to the Civil War in the ways in which Black people appropriated their spirituality as a way of resisting that terrible institution called slavery.
But the system of segregation and racial discrimination was vicious. It was evil, the way people were treated and abused. And the teaching of Jim Lawson gave us a way out, maybe a way in. And maybe not at this point, but music, Jim, played a major role. Without music, the civil rights movement would have been like a bird without wings. It created a sense of solidarity. And even when you were being arrested, put in jail, or being beaten, someone would just hum a little song, a verse of a song.
I'm curious to know, at what point did you have a sense from the beginning that you were involved not only in a historic movement, but in a movement that would succeed in achieving at least its first set of goals?
Well, I believe from the beginning, somehow, some way, that element of faith, the element of believing that somehow you're going to succeed, you're going to overcome, it's going to all work out, that you may be beaten, arrested, jailed, you may lose some of your friends or some of your colleagues, but you will win, you will have a victory.
You believed that from the beginning?
From the beginning.
Coming from Troy?
Yes, yes. So there was something about the rightness, something pure about it. And we didn't have guns and bombs and missiles, but we had something else. That sense of determination and that sense that, you know, you didn't sing "We Shall Overcome" just to be singing it. We shall overcome. And people really felt that. People believed that.
And Reverend Lawson, when you came back from India with a message of nonviolence, did you believe that its success was inexorable?
I became convinced by 1950 after starting to study Gandhi and compare this with the life and work and teachings of Jesus. I became convinced that we in the black community could begin to change America through nonviolent struggle and action.
All right.
That's reality. I did have that notion. I did not know much about what I was doing in Nashville, but I had spent some 10 years of studying nonviolence in the spiritual of the Negro, nonviolence in the strikes in America, nonviolence in the sit-in campaigns in Chicago and Los Angeles, nonviolence in the first freedom rides where Frederick Douglass and abolitionists stopped segregation in the trains of Pennsylvania and New England. Those was the earliest, that's the earliest moments I heard of the reading. This is from my study and reading and all. So it was out of that then that I teach people. One of my first tasks moving to Nashville was to go in and out of Little Rock, Arkansas, and work with 9 students at Central High who were catching just brutal treatment, verbal and often physical, and hostility in most classrooms on the effort of the KKK to drive them out of the school. And I did a workshop the first time we visited and went back almost every week for 3-4 months or so, 2 or 3 days. And I wanted to try to help them to understand that they could resist hostility and fear and the physical threats through their own souls, through their own hearts, through their own sense of who they were as people of God and children of God, and that if they accepted that gift of life, they could cultivate that life. They were under the command not to fight back, and I didn't like it when I first heard them tell me this, but I said I've got to help them to see that what your parents in the NAACP are trained to you, are saying to you, you cannot imitate the hostility and the fear and the stuff that has been thrown at you. You have to resist it. You cannot digest any of it. You have to fight against it by the fortitude of your own minds, of the fortitude of your own spirits. So that's part of why in the workshops in '59, we spent so much time in role-playing, facing violence and hostility of one form or another. It's one of the reasons why we did that.
We had what we call social drama.
Yeah, that's right.
Social drama. Had people playing the role of members of the Klan, of the opposition. They had a officers of the law, and you call people out of their name. You call them everything but a child of God, and they would take it. Some people couldn't take it, but the majority.
And did that social drama activity insulate you altogether from despair in the dark moments? There must have been dark moments at which you lapsed into despair, maybe even had a momentary loss of faith.
No, I never moved to that point. I never lost that sense of, I cannot make it, I cannot take it. I never said, I just can't take it, I'm gonna give up. So you can beat me, you can spit on me, you can put me off the lunch counter stool. On one occasion in Nashville, there was a young man by the name of James Belver. We were locked into a restaurant. They tried to fumigate what's in it. And on the Freedom Ride in 1961, the same year that President Obama was born, black people and white people could be seated on a Greyhound bus, a Trailway bus, leaving Washington, D.C. to travel through Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. We were on our way to New Orleans to test a decision of the United States Supreme Court. My seatmate was a young white gentleman. And we arrived in a little town called Rock Hill, South Carolina, at 30 or 35 miles from Charlotte. We attempted to enter a so-called white waiting room, and a group of Klans people attacked us and left us lying in a pool of blood. The local police officials came up, wanted to know whether we wanted to press charges. We said no. We believe in the way of peace. We believe in the philosophy of nonviolence. Many years later, one of the guys that beat my seatmate, myself, came to my office in Washington. He came in February of '09, and he said, Mr. Lewis, I've been a member of the Klan. You on the Freedom Ride. I'm one of the people that beat you. He started crying. His son started crying. He said, will you forgive me? Will you accept my apology? And I said, I forgive you. I accept the apology. The two of them hugged me, I hugged them back, and three of us cried together. That is the power of peace, power of the way of love, power of the philosophy of nonviolence.
John. In the various campaigns in which I participated, I've been asked, were you afraid? And I have to say that not going on the Freedom Ride, not in the Birmingham campaign, St. Augustine, not in the sit-in campaigns of many other places, did I ever sense fear in the work that we were doing and in the struggle. Now, I've had fear moments, 2 or 3 very painful ones, but they were not they were not riding in the bus to Jackson, Mississippi, where we were. It was never on any sit-in campaign or picket line or peace vigil in Memphis or Nashville. Never in any of the direct action things that I did I have any moments of fear. Period. Bernard Lafayette said.
How do you explain?
I could describe a couple of moments of very real fear, 2 experiences I remember especially, but they had nothing to do with an assignment in the struggle. I think maybe that, 2 things that I could explain. Bernard Lafayette told me the same thing a few years ago. 2 things. One is that if you see a work that has to be done, and you know that that work is on the side of social history, on the side of God, I'll speak as a prophet that way, on the side of eternity, on the side of beauty and wonder and truth, on the side that produces courage and faith, I suspect, therefore, if you once are of the mind that that work must be done, then I think that's the thing that happened. And the second thing is that especially after the sit-in campaign of Nashville, we knew we were on the right side of politics and the right side of history and the right side of God. Many of us knew that. We had no doubt about it. Would you say that?
Yeah, yes, I felt the same way as you did, Jim. And even when we were beaten and trampled on the bridge as we attempted to march from Selma to Montgomery, my only concern, to be very frank and candid with you, growing up in Alabama, I never learned to swim. And so when we were getting ready to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge,
The river.
the Alabama River, Jose Williams said to me, "John, can you swim?" and I said, "No, what about you?" He said, "A little." Now, if they had threatened to pull me overboard in that river, I don't know what would have happened, but I'm glad they did.
We're all very glad they didn't.
Right.
So in reflecting back on this extraordinary time that you so vividly described for us, I'm wondering if you could tell us what you think the legacy of your work was and is. What is the ongoing legacy of the message of nonviolence in the world we inhabit today?
I think the message is simple. That when a group of committed and dedicated people come together and understand as we understood as a result of the teaching of Jim Lawson. This man, I don't say it because he's here, but he imbues that sense of right, the sense of discipline in us. We couldn't turn back. We couldn't give up. We became his students. He taught us. He was our teacher. And he helped change America. But there's so many disciples, students, learning from his teaching. They went all across America and around the world. There were students, black and white, men and women. It was not just African American. There was a group of Asian American students that were studying in America. I remember there was 2 young men from Canada studying. They became unbelievable staff people for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. There was a young Jewish student who became my roommate for about 3 years. He was born in New York City. This is Danny Lyon. Became one, some of you may recognize the name, the photographer. And he, we shared an apartment together in Southwest Atlanta. And we only had one bathroom, and he used the bathroom as the dark room. And I was so afraid that one night I would go to use the bathroom and pick up the wrong bottle of the fluid I used. But these people like Danny Lyon is white and Jewish and men and women, they put their lives on. The 3 young men, Andy Goodman, Micah Scherner, Jewish, James Chaney, African American, went out on a summer night of June 21st, 1964, and they were murdered in Mississippi because they were trying to help people get registered to vote. They were one of the saddest and darkest times for me in the movement. So we have recruited more than 1,000 young people to come south to work. We can never forget that. And I tell young people all the time that these 3 young men didn't die in Vietnam. They didn't die in the Middle East, Eastern Europe. They didn't die in Africa or Central South America. They died right here in our own country, trying to help people become participants in the democratic process. And people said today, I'm not going to vote. I'm not registered. I'm not going to vote. And I said to them over and over again, the vote is almost sacred. It's precious. It's the most powerful, nonviolent instrument or tool that we have in our democratic society, and we must use it.
Reverend Lawson, the legacy of nonviolence today, what do you want to impart to the next generations engaged in the struggles for justice?
Well, I've just finished a four-day institute on nonviolence, Thursday, Friday, Saturday at the downtown, and this morning till 4 o'clock at the downtown UCLA Labor Center of activists from around the LA area and western part of the country. We're going to do one of these every 6 months maybe in different segments of the country, trying to help activist people today to understand that the activism of the day, as a lot of it in the 60s represented as well, must understand that as Einstein presented equations on behalf of gravity and relativity that transformed the research and the work of the science, so in the 20th century, Gandhi pulled together in the same way a range of thought from across the earth, including the Hebrew Christian Bible, which he read from cover to cover, and interpreted life and the politics as having to become a spiritual, moral, political journey that he called nonviolence or satyagraha or soul force. That Gandhian experiment of the first half of the 20th century is more significant and more important to the future of the human race than the Einstein monumental contribution. Einstein and Gandhi became the two finalists for Time magazine at the end of the 19th century, at the 20th century rather, around 1990. They started this worldwide search for the most significant contribution to the 20th century. Einstein won that study. Gandhi was the runner-up. But I maintain that the idea of how we human beings use the gift of life, as Gandhi called the most creative power of the universe, how we use that life, he said, will help us move from a culture and technology and greed and violence. And Gandhi also insisted that if we of the human race cannot learn to change our ways, use that which eternity has planted within us as the power by which our lives are held, that the race could very well commit suicide, whether with a big bang or a whimper.
Well, on that note, I want to say that this has been an extraordinary evening, and it's an evening that really has, I think, affirmed in the most profound way the teaching and example of our beloved brother and teacher,
Absolutely.
Rabbi Leonard Beerman. I want to just recognize that Leonard would say, this has all been well and good, but what are we going to do tomorrow? What's our next action step for tomorrow? And so I want to, if I can, leave you, Representative Lewis, with the last word, because we find ourselves in a time of perplexity at a minimum and darkness. And I wonder how you, both as a person of faith, as a crusader for justice, as leading political figure in our country, find rays of optimism that you can transmit to us and particularly the younger generation.
First of all, let me say, I'm honored again to be here with each and every one of you, to be here in the midst, presence of Jim Lawson, my beloved friend, beloved teacher, beloved brother. To be here in this synagogue, in this temple. I say over and over again that you must never, ever get down. Jim, not too long ago, I was speaking in Nashville, Tennessee. And before I got up to speak, a lady came to me and she said, "Congressman, I feel so down." She said, "I need a hug." I said, "I need one too." This was right after the election. One thing that moved me so much so was the Women's March. Yeah. Really. I think we all can take a lesson from the Women's March. Good. Oh, good. Good. Well, the women in Atlanta, in my district, asked me to lead the march for them. And there was more than 63,000 women marching in Atlanta. But we got to pick them up and put them down all across America and around the world. I don't want to be political about anything tonight, I know. But I tell you, we living at a time when there are people and individuals in high places a threat not only to America, but to the planet. And we have to save this planet for generations yet unborn. It's in our hand. Got to leave something for our children and their children. Be hopeful, be optimistic, and let nothing, not anything, put you down. It's all gonna work out if we do our job. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, is this? Thank you for being here. When I first met Congressman Lewis, he said to me, what we are creating is a beloved community. This is the beloved community. You are seeing it in existence tonight. So don't forget to stand up, to speak out, and get in trouble.